What's up, folks? I'm JC Owens, and this is Rock My World, episode 37, The Transhumanist Temptation. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware, but Secretary Pete Hegseth, he is a Templar, much like I used to be. One of the ways you can tell is by the particular tattoos he has all over him. Like me, he's covered up in the signs, symbols, and mottos of the order, plus his affiliations with other people that are affiliated and things like that. Uh, um, but also you can tell by the things he's pushing. You know, not too long ago he had pushed for the integration of more AI systems and digital surveillance stuff into the military. More autonomous drones and all this kind of stuff. And just here recently, he has started pushing for testosterone testing and testosterone replacement therapy for our armed forces. Now, this fits into globalist technocracy mainly through the transhumanist, angle of the whole agenda. What is transhumanism? Well, it is the upgrading of human beings and the human evolution of the humans, as Noah Yuval Harari put it at the, I think it was at the WEF when he said that. I'm pretty sure he states it in his book as well. This fits into it, like, as far as like the turning humanity into the Borg collective, as it were. Like, this begins just much like the the C-19er event not too long ago, and the those jibby jabs that alter human DNA. Um, this kind of fits into that, like altering the human being into something else. Now, if you read it like H.G. Wells, like it's recommended in my reading list, he talks about this like, humanity becoming these two distinct groups of people, the Eloi and the Morlock is what he called them. But it's basically, the upper classes, use technology and gene editing and cybernetics, all this kind of stuff to upgrade themselves, and they progressively become a different thing compared to regular people who progressively go downward in evolutionary traits and become more like caveman-like and crude, violent, etc. You have people like Jonas Salk and his son that have been talking about this stuff forever as well. They talk about eugenics and this upgrading of the human being, and what Hegseth is doing plays right into this. Plays right into it. I've talked about it on many streams in the past. Back when I was on the past shows I've been on. I talked about this. I predicted that the U.S. military would be going this route. You'll soon see things like them wanting to put microchips in soldiers so that they can not only track their location but also track their vital signs while they're in the field. I know, sounds pretty useful for an army, but at the same time you got to think like big picture what this allows the government to do, right? And the precedents it kind of sets, right? The primarily this is going to like advance the globalist agenda by integrating these massive AI-driven autonomous systems and biological performance optimization into the armed forces. This, like I said, this fits right into the West's public-private partnerships thing, and it's, quickly trying to turn us into, the Borg collective from Star Trek. If that, I don't know how many of you actually have watched Star Trek. Like, I'm not the hugest fan of Star Trek, really, but for our purposes, this fits right into it. Gene Roddenberry is, quite close to a lot of these globalists, and I do believe that influenced his Star Trek narrative, right? Like, notice in Star Trek they have a one world government. They have a lot of these things that the globalists want, right? They want a one world system that is basically governed by the experts, as we've talked about before. They want regular people to be controlled and to be completely dependent on the system, and you can imagine how everyone getting dependent on, uh, lab-created hormones and, synthetic foods and all this other kind of stuff, it just entrenches these elites even more, because now you can't do without them, right? Now they'll be able to track everywhere you go, everything you do, because you'll be chipped. Because don't think that this is going to stop with the U.S. military. The U.S. military doing it is just the beginning. It's just the beginning. Because think about it. Think about the health implications of being able to chip someone and, read their location as well as their vital signs, right? You'll know where they are. You'll know if their heart's beating fast, if it's beating slow. It'd basically be like an onboard lie detector that the state can not only track you with, but they can also analyze whether or not you're nervous or you're angry or any number of these other things, just like these chips would allow it to do. And they're coming. They're coming, just like I predicted that they would start wanting to jack with people's hormones and, DNA. Well, now they're wanting to jack with you further. I promise you, it's coming. This is just the stepping stone to the greater plan. It's all right there in all the books that I've recommended. In my reading list. If anybody needs that, just ask for it. I'll be glad to repost it for you, so you can read it in their own words. The elites have been talking about this forever. One of Obama's primary advisors, he wrote a book, stating very much some of the same stuff. Doesn't matter whether it's left or right. Like, you have people on both sides talking about these things. They may give different reasons behind why they support it, but at the end of the day, as per usual, it all goes towards the same ultimate goal, right? Like, they will pilot this in the military, and then they'll start expanding it out into the, public domain, using primarily, health and safety, just like they did with the C-19 event, as I was saying earlier. Like, they'll appeal to, well, we want to make the blind, we want to make it possible for the blind to see and the crippled to walk, and we want to protect the children. We want to do all that, don't we? If you don't want to do that, then does that mean that you hate children and you hate this is how they play. This is the game. Watch for those false equivalency fallacies like that, folks. It's colloquially called the Hitler likes peanut butter argument. You like peanut butter, Hitler likes peanut butter. Therefore, you must be like. You see the broken reasoning there. Just because cats and dogs both have 4 legs and are pets does not make them the same creature, right? Yeah. If we're logically consistent, then the Hitler likes peanut butter argument doesn't really stand, right? Same kind of thing here. So don't let them mess with your head that way. Those appeals to emotions and false equivalencies, they're not logical. They don't follow at all. It's flawed reasoning that doesn't make any sense. They'll, like a lot of these atheists and, scientific experts will say that Christians like myself are insane, but, look at some of the reasoning that they use and how many logical fallacies they rely on to justify the things that they want to do and the ideas that they have, and you'll see, it plays out quite clearly once you start looking at things they say and do from this standpoint. It doesn't logically follow. It just doesn't. It's completely flawed. At best, they usually have some kind of circular reasoning, or like I said, an appeal to emotion, where they're going to say, think of the children, think of the crippled, unhealthy people. And it's like, well, yes, while we do care about those people, while it is very unfortunate that they are, sick or, not able to see or any of these kind of things, like, we have to think about the bigger picture and what this kind of stuff would mean for freedom. You know, the reason I called this episode the Transhumanist Temptation is because it very much works through temptation, right? This system that will take away your freedom, autonomy, privacy, like, it's going to primarily be spread by these promises of safety and security and these appeals to emotion. This is how it's going to be pushed. It always is, and they're already doing it now. You can look on YouTube right now and see videos where it's showing veterans with robotic limbs and things like that, and you can see actors who were deaf, like, getting the cochlear implants. This is how they pass it off to the public. They make you think it's all perfectly safe, and then once you're in it and can't get out, you find out, oh no, they have my data and they're spying on me and they're sending it to the government, and and all these different things, right? They're selling your data to some third party, way off in some other country somewhere, right? Like, this is the kind of stuff that happens. Just saw a story this morning on how shark vacuums have, shout out to Lewis Rossman, by the way, he's the one I saw the story on, but where shark vacuums has known for months that their robotic vacuum can let just about anybody see, like, the floor plan of your house and stuff, and they knew it for months and didn't tell anyone. They still release the vacuum, let people use it. What's going to come of that? Probably nothing. If anything, like, it happens, it'll just advance the agenda like it usually does. Going through the normal channels, it's not going to get us out of this one, folks. It's not going to get us out of it at all. One of the very first things we got to do is start making ourselves independent of the system itself. Become as independent and self-sufficient as you possibly can. The less dependent on the system you are, the more free you are to make your own decisions and decide what you want to do. Once you're desperate, then you kind of get stuck having to do what they tell you, don't you? Anyway, we'll leave it right there for today, folks. I'll holler at you next weekend. As always, much love and peace.